Your Excellencies, dear guests, you are all most warmly welcome to the webinar. My name is Pekka Lindqvist. I act today as a moderator and as a representative of the Finnish Institute in the Middle East. But I do my daily work at the Akademi University, which plays a certain role in the life of Hilma Granqvist. When I sit in my office at the university and look through my window over the courtyard, I see the main library of the university. Behind those windows looking towards me, just 50 meters or so from my desk, is the manuscript department. And there stand those shelves filled with cardboard folders, taking several meters of space. Folders full of diaries, notebooks, letters, and loose papers. Each folder has a signum on its back: Granqvist Hilma 1, Granqvist Hilma 2, and so on. When you reach the end of the shelf, it says Granqvist Hilma 51. They have been there for decades, fully available, never in secret, not restricted in any way, and still inaccessible. And let's remember, this is only the minor part of the archive. The rest of it in London has been even more out of reach for most of us. Today, in this webinar, we celebrate the fact that this treasure has been made accessible for anyone willing to explore the work of this extraordinary scholar. The digital publication project, a project of many years, has reached its final stage. Besides being a celebration, I believe that this webinar will also be an occasion for learning. For that purpose, we have some experts here today who each of them in turn will take over the stage or the screen and lead us to hear and see interesting things. And perhaps already this evening, after we have closed this session, we may witness a rush of visitors in the digital archive. Then we have succeeded. Once more, welcome. And let me introduce our first speaker. She is Dr. Sofia Häggman. Sofia is the director of the Museum of Mediterranean and Near Eastern Antiquities in Stockholm, Sweden. She is also the author of the biography of Hilma Granqvist, a source book #1 for anyone wishing to know about the topic. It bears the title Hilma Granqvist, Antropolog med hjärtat i Palestina. It's in Swedish. But the good news for those not fluent in Swedish is that an English translation is being prepared. Now, Dr. Häggman will give us a short introduction to the life and work of Hilma Granqvist. Please, Sofia.
Thank you so much. And I will share my screen. I hope it looks all right. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, and dear colleagues and friends. First of all, thank you so much for this invitation. It's been a few years ago now since I worked through Hilma Granqvist's material, and it's wonderful to have this opportunity to go back and try to summarize the life and legacy of this extraordinary scholar and person. But it's also difficult. How do I sum up such a long-lived life with full of pioneering work and amazing achievement in just a few minutes? It goes without saying that these are just going to be a few glimpses. We start with a glimpse from 1923, because there was nothing really in Hilma Granqvist's youth or early career that indicated that she would dedicate her life to Palestine. I would say that the turning point was in many ways the time she spent as a guest researcher in Berlin in 1923. She was then working on her doctorate thesis about the women of the Old Testament, a nearly impossible topic given to her by her supervisor at Helsinki University. In Berlin, Hilma learned a whole new research paradigm, but even more importantly, she got to know people who worked on the ground in Palestine. So I would say that it was then and there that Hilma Granqvist decided to actually go to Palestine to study the women of the Old Testament in a context and an environment that she assumed had not changed very much since biblical times. Assisted by her professors, her German professors, maybe I should point out, Hilma took part as the first and only woman in an introductory course to the history and culture of the Holy Land at the German Biblical Institute in Jerusalem in 1925. And after the course was over, she was to start her own research on those biblical women. And for this, she needed a community where the ancient customs were preserved. And she found this community in the village of Artas, assuming that it was by the farming Muslim population that the old biblical customs had been best preserved. And as Qleibo has pointed out, also Artas was by then also well known among European visitors to the Holy Land. And it was also within a safe distance from Bethlehem and Jerusalem. And I think all of this affected the choice of this village. In Artas, Hilma Granqvist moved in with Louise Baldensperger, who's in the photo on the right. Sit Louisa, as she was called, had lived her whole life in the village. And through Sit Louisa, also Hilma, soon known as Sitte Halime, became accepted and trusted by the villagers, which was of course necessary for her in order to carry out her research. But something important happened when Hilma came to Artas. Almost immediately, she realized that Palestine could not and should not be studied through a biblical lens, but that it was a very alive and vibrant society in its own right. So Hilma changed the topic of research and decided to leave the biblical women aside and instead study all aspects of village life in Artas, using the institution of marriage as her starting point. And this was quite revolutionary at the time, a whole new sort of functionalist approach to the work. Sadly, it was also a little too revolutionary for her professors back home in Helsinki University. So Hilma Granqvist was not allowed to present her research for a doctorate degree when she returned from her stay in Palestine in 1927. There were a number of reasons for this, but in short, it actually boils down to that she refused to follow the advice of her supervisor, and she didn't want to adapt to what was still a very traditional Orientalist narrative. Instead, she set out to prove it wrong, and it cost her her career in her home country. It was only thanks to her good relations with Edvard Westermark that Hilma Granqvist, much delayed, got her doctorate at his university at Åbo Akademi instead in January 1932 on her thesis, Marriage Conditions in a Palestinian Village. By then, Hilma had already been back to Palestine for one more season of fieldwork in 1930 to 31, during which she also traveled extensively around Palestine and also crossed over to Egypt. And these are pictures and the writings from her travel journal from the Egypt trip. But she still also collected more material. Most of what she had collected was, however, during that first trip in 25 to 27. All this material she published in a series of books, all of which have been later described as a goldmine for ethnographic research in Palestine. But what was it then that made her research so special? Oh, it was so many things. First of all, Hilma Granqvist developed a new method of doing fieldwork by actually living among the community she was studying, and she actually participated in the life of that community, a method very well known later as participatory observation. And this new approach she also combined with the focus on marriage as one of many functional components in a complex social system. Equally groundbreaking at the time was her focus on one single community, Artas, which then had about 400 persons, 400 inhabitants. And this was also very different from the wide-reaching generalizations that characterized other scholars' work at the time. Also Westermark, whom she very much admired. I mean, he wrote the history of human marriage, and Hilma Granqvist wrote about marriage in a village of 400 people. So it was much narrower scope. Hilma Granqvist was also the first to study the lives of women and children in Palestine, and she was meticulous in her research. She recorded every marriage that had been made, not only during her time in the village, but as far back as anyone could remember. So in the end, Hilma Granqvist's statistics cover all marriages in Artas during a period of 100 years. She also listed divorces, childbirths, deaths, and much, much more. And she kept individual files of almost every adult individual that she met. Not only did she keep these records, she also used these statistics to highlight the difference between the ideal or a desirable way of doing things and how things were actually done. This was all very new at the time, and Hilma's research was very well received by the international scholarly community. And the tragic turn of history has, of course, also made her statistics and her genealogical data important to Palestinians in a way that Hilma Granqvist could not foresee in the 1920s and 30s. Equally important as all this written data is Hilma Granqvist's photographs. She took hundreds of photographs in Artas. Most of them are women and children, or women performing daily chores, or during various celebrations. And of course, there were plenty of photographers in the Holy Land in the 1920s. What makes Hilma Granqvist's photos so special is that the women are named, they are active, they're the agents of actions, not just some exotic backdrop or anonymous type of Oriental women. Hilma Granqvist's life was not at all easy. Many of her colleagues were actively trying to destroy her chances of a career, of an academic career. And of course, many times she found life hard and unfair. But still, in most letters, she comes across as genuinely grateful that she had found her calling, that she had found her own village, Artas, and that she'd been so warmly accepted into the village community. To Hilma, the village of Artas was not only an interesting topic of research, it was home, a place where she felt accepted, where she could be herself. I like myself here, she wrote in her diary. And she also is recorded to have said, if I had 10 lives, I would spend them all in Palestine. In the end, Hilma Granqvist did not spend all that many years on the ground in Palestine. It was that first trip in 1927 to 25 when she collected most of her material, and then the winter of 1930 to 31 when she also went to Egypt. After that, she had difficulties to find funding for her research trips, and the world also changed dramatically in the 1940s. So Hilma's work on birth and childhood among the Arabs was not published until 1947, and the sequel on child problems in 1950. By then, things had changed forever in Palestine, and Hilma Granqvist started dedicating herself to informing the general public in Finland about the situation of the Palestinian people, the dispossession of them, and their lawful right to return. She had lectures, she gave radio programs, and she wrote articles, all based on letters that friends in Artas and Jerusalem sent to her. Most importantly, at one time, it was Salvatore Bandak, the priest of the convent in Artas, who wrote to her regularly. Still, nothing of this had prepared Hilma for what she saw when she returned for a final visit to Palestine in 1959. The refugee camps broke her heart, and that last visit was in general a rather sad trip. Most of her friends were gone, everything had changed. And after her return to Finland, she wrote her last book based on the material from Artas, Muslim Death and Burial, which was published in 1965. But all the way up until her death in 1972, Hilma Granqvist stayed in close contact with the friends she had left in Palestine, and she constantly kept herself up to date with the political development. And in a letter that she wrote to a friend towards the end of her life, she said that it felt as if her body was trapped in Finland, but her heart lived on forever in Palestine. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sofia, so much for this presentation. The next two presentations will take us to the archive, which in a way is the reason we are here today. First, Dr. Patricia Berg, working at the Society of Swedish Literature in Finland, the organization which hosts the website, will introduce the digital archive. Please pay close attention to what you see and afterwards go and explore more by yourself. Patricia, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Pekka. So good afternoon. My name is Patricia Berg. Your Excellencies, of course, my name, and I am the editorial director here at the Society of Swedish Literature in Finland. And the society has then, together with the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, financed the digitization of the archive of Hilma Granqvist. So my topic today will be on this digital archive, which means that I will show you the website we have created and how you can use it and what material there is on it. But let me first say, or start with saying, that I'm very pleased that we have such a large audience today, and it proves that our work with publishing the material is necessary and important, and so we are very happy about this. The whole idea to digitize this archive was born during a conference in Cairo in 2013. It was organized by the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, and on the conference, Sheila Weir, who I also saw is participating in this webinar today, gave a talk about Hilma Granqvist. And Granqvist was a scholar I knew very little about from before. But we started to discuss this material, the archive, and Ari Kerkkänen, who was then the director of the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, pointed out that the material should be made available, well, to scholars, but also to Palestinians, to Finnish, who are interested in this period and this area. So thus this idea was born to digitize the archive and publish it online. And now, 8 years later, we are very proud to say that we actually achieved what we set out to do. First, some words on the archive and on the material. As Sofia, Dr. Häggman just said, Granqvist died here in Helsinki in 1972. And during her last years, she went through her papers and notes, and she organized them herself into an archive. She had, during her life, preserved almost everything, and the material was vast. 150 boxes in all now in the archives. But then after her death, it was decided to divide the material. And so the archive was divided between Åbo Akademi Library in Turku, here in Finland, and then the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. Material of a more personal character was donated to Turku, and material then related to her research was donated to London. And the hope was that the research material would reach a larger audience in London than hidden away in an archive in Finland. But unfortunately, this has not been the case, and the material has not been used to any larger extent, even though it contains highly valuable information for persons, scholars interested in Palestine. But after this conference then in Cairo in 2013, the Finnish Institute in the Middle East and the Society of Swedish Literature in Finland began this collaboration to produce a digital publication of Granqvist's archive material. And we started, of course, by digitizing the archive. And as I said, it was vast, 150 boxes in all. And so it was not possible for us to digitize everything. And it also contains personal material of maybe lesser interest for academic work. So we just decided to focus on material related to Granqvist fieldwork in Palestine and to leave out the rest. There has been a small group of people working in the project during these 8 years. We have Kira Pihlflyckt, who will give her talk after me, and she has done most of the work. I have been in charge of the administration and coordination. And then in addition, we have Niklas Liljestrand and Jonas Lindqvist here from the Society of Swedish Literature that have created and developed the website. And I will now share my screen and show you the website. Hopefully you are already have had a look at the granqvist.sls.fi. Now I am here. This is not where I am supposed to be, but here. Can you see it? Pekka, yes, good. So the address is granqvist.sls.fi, as you can see up here. So in November 2018, the website was launched for the first time, and the first part of the material was published. And we have the editorial text on the pages are both in Swedish and English. I have it on English now, but you can switch here to Swedish if you prefer. But let's have it on English. But this is the editorial text. The archive material in itself is, of course, in the language that Hilma Granqvist wrote in. So it's only a picture of the material. It has not been transcribed or translated. But the page in itself you can have in English. And under About, up here, you can find information on Granqvist and on the archive. We have an article written by Dr. Häggman, and then we have a timeline with some more information on Granqvist. We have also information on copyright and who to contact if you run into trouble on the page. So you should find all necessary information here. But the main is, of course, content. And here we have it divided into archive and books. Under books, you will find the 5 books that Hilma Granqvist published on Artas, her research. They are out of stock, and therefore we thought it important to add them to the web page so that they are easily accessible for scholars also like this. And you can download them either as PDF or EPUB, and then search through them for the information you need. So these are the published books. But the main thing, of course, with the web page is the archive. This we have divided into 5 categories. So we have photographs, field notes, correspondence, unpublished manuscripts, and Palestine journals. And each category has a short introduction written by Kira Pihlflyckt, and then the material in itself like this. Of these 5 categories, the Palestine journals were the first to be published. They were published already in 2018. They are grouped chronologically like this in the same way that Granqvist did, and consist of 13 journals in all. She wrote these in Swedish in 1930 and 1931 when she visited Artas for the second time. And they are written as travel notes to her mother, so they are all quite personal character. She intended to publish them herself, but she never did. I will just show you one page from the journal. So this is the Palestine journals, which were the first to be published. Then secondly, in 2019, we published the photographs that I already showed you. So they are divided into 17 albums. They are approximately 1,000 photographs in all. And they have been grouped by us in order to make it easier for the visitor of this website to find what he or she is looking for. Granqvist, let's start, for example, this one. Granqvist often made some kind of a note attached to the photo. And so we have added this one. They are mostly in Swedish. And so, yes, we have also transcribed it here if it's difficult to read. You can, for example, take this photograph by Louis Baldensperger. You can also flip it here if you want to have the back page, as sometimes Granqvist wrote something on the back. So these are the photographs. So in the Palestine journals and in the photograph, which are these 2 categories, you can search for person, places, and subjects. So we have tagged these 3 groups. If a person can be identified, we have added some short information to it for here, or a link to a source. For places in Palestine, we have added a link to Google Maps, so you can easily find it where it is. Of course, they are all quite close to each other, but still. So these photographs and Palestine journals were published here on the site already before. But now, last week, we published the field notes, the correspondence, and unpublished manuscripts. First, the field notes. They are grouped here on the site according to which of the 5 books they relate to. So Granqvist gathered material in Artas, then she wrote her 5 books on Artas. And here we have then the field notes concerning that book. As you can see, they are written in the local Arabic dialect, usually transcribed, and has then a translation into German. And they look like this. So I have to move on in order to keep my time. The correspondence is a selection, and it consists of letters to and from 14 people Granqvist kept contact with over a longer period of time. So most are of a professional character, but we also have letters to her brother, Walter Granqvist, and her mother, Ida Granqvist. Letters to families and friends in Finland are written in Sweden, and the rest are in English, French, or German. And then we have 2 unpublished manuscripts, one in Swedish and one in English. Drömmar och fantasier i dikt och verklighet is complete. She intended to publish it herself, but she never did. And it tells about the so-called Dala colony in Jerusalem. And then we have a manuscript, or very primarily draft, that concerned Arab women that she was working on. So that is the material, and this is all we have time for now. I hope you will have a look at the website and that you find the material useful, of interest. The editorial text on this page that you can find under About and so forth are licensed under CC BY 4.0, which means you can use the material, but with references to the site. But the copyright for the archive material is still held by the archives. So if you, for example, want to print a photograph, you should be in contact with the Palestine Exploration Fund in London in order to get the permission. Okay, thank you for listening.
Thank you, Patricia, very much for this introduction. And now our next speaker, Kira Pihlflyckt, at present a project researcher at the Finnish Institute in the Middle East, might be the person who has spent, as Patricia said, most time in the archives of Hilma, both physically between the shelves and then by the keyboard in order to make things work. And Kira will now open up some of her observations in the archives. Please, Kira, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Pekka. I will share my screen. Just a moment. Okay, is that okay? Excellent. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you, Patricia and Sofia, for your presentations. I'm now going to offer some concluding notes on the archives and perhaps some observations that I made on Hilma as a researcher from the archives. I will talk a bit more about the archives. I will perhaps repeat something that Patricia and Sofia said, but it's worth repeating, I guess. And also a bit about the idea behind the current outline of the archive, what kind of challenges they presented, and how Hilma as a researcher came sort of alive through her papers. When we embarked on this project with Patricia in 2015, which was when we really concretely started on the project, we had a clear aim of making as much as possible of Granqvist material available on the website. British anthropologist Qleibo, which Patricia mentioned, and who is here today, had mentioned that the most important of the material is, of course, her Granqvist's photographs and field notes. So we focused on them, but also, of course, as Patricia mentioned, on her travel journals and the correspondence. The papers of Granqvist are, as mentioned, they are divided between the University Library in Turku and the Palestine Exploration Fund in London. And I started this project by visiting these archives and just sort of trying to get an overview of what they contained, and also getting a glimpse through the archive catalogs, which were, they contained a lot, but they were also outdated a bit, not completed totally. So we realized that the amount of material that were to be digitized was a very large amount. In Turku, as Patricia said, there are about 50 archive boxes, and in London at the Palestine Exploration Fund, there are around 95 boxes. And when these archives were digitized, which was done in 2016 and 2019, if I remember correctly, it resulted in altogether around 25,000 files of various kind. So we had to scale it back a bit on the idea of how much we were to publish and how to streamline this digital archive so we could complete it in a reasonable amount of time. And this, of course, resulted in the current table of content that Patricia presented to you. To this, I can add that the idea was regarding the field notes, that the idea was that the reader should be able to read the field notes according to the book in which they were published. And that's why some of the field notes are grouped according to book, and some which are not contained in any book are grouped under miscellaneous. And the main challenge, of course, was to sort of just digest and group these 25,000 files of archive material. Granqvist had begun cataloging her archive during her lifetime, but didn't have time to finish it. And Sheila Weir continued her work in London at the Palestine Exploration Fund, but some of it still remains uncatalogued. And after years of archival use, some of it is, of course, not in the intended order. So therefore, the first task was just to go through all of this, after the digitization, to just go through all the scanned material and just very largely group it according to Granqvist's vision. And then to read through it all and check that this regrouped structure was according to the intended order. And of course, in addition, there were lots of bits and pieces that did not fit anywhere, that were not in any original or unoriginal order. And these got their own grouping. This is of the field notes, but it's the same with the photographs. Granqvist intended to publish most of the photographs and had therefore grouped them accordingly. So they are largely in the same order that Granqvist intended them as such. The main task of this digital archive has been to present the version of Granqvist's work that is not found in her published books. For example, her books on Arab childhood doesn't contain the original Arabic texts, unlike marriage conditions, for example. But so these are now available on the website, which is sort of can serve as an appendix to the published books. But they are also very much evidence of Granqvist's principle of collecting and preserving as much as possible on the vernacular language and mentality, and to really ensure the integrity of the original source. Granqvist was a very meticulous researcher, but she was an even more meticulous archiver. Her research methods were various, and as we heard earlier, she would conduct interviews as well as write diaries, take photographs, take field notes, research relevant literature, study the Arabic language, and so on. This means that there are lots and lots of different drafts, versions, and copies of her own text in the archive. Granqvist, being such a careful archiver, kept almost all of her different drafts for her publications, even preserving material that she herself had marked as used, can be thrown away. She kept different versions of her manuscripts, some negatives of her photographs. She also kept all the reviews on her books that came through, and so on. What was very striking digging through this archive was, as I mentioned, finding these different versions and drafts that Granqvist made sure to keep. She had several parallel ideas of what she wanted to do with the material, not just using them in the published books, but also in different articles and presentations and talks that she held in the radio or wrote in different magazines. But she also kept this meticulous order of the archive as a sort of evidence of her own independent work, having received so much negative feedback from her male colleagues who very much doubted that she had been able to do so much work on her own. Digging through these archives have been very enlightening in seeing her independence and her accomplishments as a researcher and anthropologist. And striking is her very dedication to honor the objectivity and integrity of science. For example, just looking at the photographs that, as Sofia mentioned, present life in Artas such as it was, not restyled or mystified, or just reading her travel journals describing both the difficulties of her work and pre-war life in Jerusalem is a very exciting task. On her unpublished manuscript with the working title Women, although it was very much left under construction, it's a very interesting project since she intended to examine the life of Arab women on the concept of honor and the concept of women labor and so forth. Here is a photograph representing women's work, also a photo album under the photograph section. And as Sofia also mentioned, her letters with some of the villagers in Artas, like Salvatore Bendak, but also Louise Baldensperger, are further evidence of her love and interest of the people in Artas. Here is Louise Baldensperger, and also worth mentioning, Hilma Granqvist's two collaborators and informants, Aliya and Hamdiya, from the village in Artas. Just as a conclusion on this, Hilma Granqvist, although she didn't have time to finish most of what she intended to do and met very much resistance, but this archive hopefully will give her some reputation back, but also be an opportunity for other researchers to perhaps continue her work and see what she intended to do. This last picture, when she's in Egypt relaxing, is very much how I picture her if she would see this digitized archive right now. Thank you very much. And also a very big thank you to the very helpful staff of the Palestine Exploration Fund in London and in Turku. Just in case a researcher for some reason needs to go to the actual archive and not just our digital archive, they will be met by a very helpful and friendly staff at both places. Thank you.
Thank you, Kira, so much for this presentation with personal notes. Dear guests, it's time for a 5 minutes break now, which, however, Doesn't have to be that ordinary, boring break with coffee and biscuits and friends. Instead, you can stay here by your workstation. During the break, we will see the slideshow, which was already running as an introduction into this webinar. It contains 40 old photographs from the archive. Most of them have been taken by her, or at least through her camera lens. And most of them depict life and people of Artas. Some of them are from Jerusalem and other parts of Palestine. Enjoy. We will continue here exactly 3:47. See you. Welcome back. Now I have the great pleasure to introduce Dr. Ali Qleibo, a Jerusalemite Palestinian scholar working in the fields of anthropology, political science, and international relations. Dr. Qleibo is a lecturer at Quds University, Jerusalem, and has acted also as a visiting professor in Tokyo and Kyoto universities. He is the author of 6 books and numerous articles. Today, his presentation has a title, Portrait of Artas, 19th Century Colonialist Ambitions in Palestine. And if you want to read more, please note that his article from 2014 with the title Serendipity in Artas, Portrait of a Palestinian Village is available on the website of the Finnish Institute in the Middle East. Now, Dr. Qleibo, please.
Good afternoon. Thanks for inviting me to join your conference. It's indeed a pleasure. The talk about Artas, the contributions that Hilma Granqvist has done to Palestinian consciousness about national identity related to patrimony, cultural heritage, are too many to enumerate. She is at the foreground of our consciousness as we conduct our fieldwork in Palestinian anthropology. To say the least, I became an anthropologist because I was so taken with her literature. First of all, she writes about the Palestinians, but she has a literary style that has always engaged us. So I read her before I became an anthropologist and became an anthropologist afterwards. Now, Hilma came at a very pivotal point to Artas. Before her, there were the Brandenburgers, they were Swiss, and Artas had risen to great fame from the 1870s. It's not a place that was forgotten. It was a place that had a special position as a millennialist center. The way that the millennialists were able to move into Artas is in itself very symptomatic of the problems that existed in Palestine in the first part of the 19th century. Following the Napoleon's withdrawal from Palestine, there was a period of chaos that took over the country by storm. Nomadic Bedouins moved from all over Palestine, from the Naqab Desert, from Marj Bani Amr, and from the Judean Desert, and they sacked and destroyed cities. The Khudaira stands as one major city that was destroyed. Beit Jibrin, a famous old town, one of the biggest cities, features in the Madama plan, was destroyed and pillaged by the Bedouins. And Artas lived, and all Palestinian villagers lived in the terror of the nomadic attacks. It's the form of raids where the nomads would move into the hinterland and appropriate further territories and would look for reasons to take over more land. It is within this context that Artas was saved by the British consul, who was able to arrange to pay for the ransom that the Bedouins have made with the local peasants. The peasants of Artas had taken shelter for over 20 years in a castle next to the water, Solomon pools, and they could not go back to their villages. Mushelman, a millennialist, happened to see the land and the village, and when he inquired, he realized other people are terrified and are taking shelter with the Ottoman garrison on the edge of the water pools, but could not go back to their village. So he saved them, paid the ransom, made the peace, allowed them to return safely to their village. In return, they would work as hired laborers in their own land to pay back the money that he had, the blood money that he paid for the Bedouins. So the story itself is very interesting because we never realized the amount of chaos that Palestine had fallen into from the time the withdrawal of Napoleon till the 1850s. When Hilma came, it was already back into order. The Ottomans and then the British were able to settle down all the problems. Not only that, the Ottomans were able to set up Beersheba as a city in the Naqab in order to control the nomadic incursions into the hinterland. So we get to see a very interesting history of Palestine. It's, if we want to do it, it's encapsulated. It's like a microcosm of the problems of Palestine in the 19th century. Now, the idea of biblical archaeology, biblical expeditions, the finding parallels between Palestinian way of life, Palestinian villages, and biblical archaeology, biblical towns, that was the fashion at the time. That's what they did. Of course, it had a political dimension to it. That's beyond the scope of this paper, this presentation. What I want to say now is she presented us with a very, very interested Hilma Granqvist in her analysis. She came, the whole setup was done. The British Exploration Fund had already done the research, drawing parallels between Arabic villages, their anagrammatic changes to Arabic names, finding the parallels, doing all the exploration of all the villages. They all knew the connection of each village to the Old Testament. And the assumption that was made was Palestinian social structure. Palestinian peasants are the foundation of their cultural identity, of their heritage, is biblical. Hilma was an anthropologist, sensitive. She studied with the best, with Malinowski at certain point, with Radcliffe Brown. So she was able to go beyond that paradigm, the biblical interpretation of Palestinian cultural landscape, archaeological landscape, even the geography of the Holy Land was viewed in biblical terms. She was able to move beyond it and indicate that this village can be meaningful in and of itself without any reference to previous experiences. So she did not tie them up to neither the Old Testament, customs and manners, nor to the biblical narratives, though in the footnotes we read all that, but not in the text itself. The text itself is a beautiful rendition of the customs, many anecdotes, many stories. It's a beautiful work of to read on its own. Maybe because I'm Palestinian, I like to read it. Even now, as I saw the pictures, I was very shocked to see that all these women did not have embroidery, which we now come to think of as an integral aspect of Palestinian peasant life. The embroidery, they don't have it. They are still dressed in very, very simple black dresses. We don't see embroidery. So basically the photographs, the things, she could see certain things, but we through her can see, through hindsight, we see other aspects of Palestinian cultural identity documented, archived very well at a certain period. Now, we anthropologists, and my anthropology, though inspired by her, cannot be limited to a simple, we don't do that kind of analysis anymore. You cannot look at a village and see it as a complete world in itself. I'm conducting research on a small village called Rabud. The village goes, it has the Canaanite walls. It's almost 5,000 years old. The caves, the temples of the Canaanites still exist. In that village, in Rabud, they did not have a mosque, and they have left it only in 20 years ago. Only in the new villages they built mosques when they moved outside the old village. But you cannot understand it by itself. To understand it, you have to study it within the overall context of all the villages around it, in relation also to the cultural basin of the Mount Hebron valleys and in relation to Al-Naqab Desert. What I'm trying to say is Artas is integrally related in the books we read. according to the native category of thought, the Ta'amre Bedouins were their enemies. They were the others, and the Artas people are disconnected from them. But ethnographic and anthropological research shows even the villages of Artas, of Bethlehem, all these people in that whole area come originally from one village, with settlement, nomadic settlement at Kua, which is Ta'amre Bedouins. As I look at the picture now, which is a wonderful contribution that she gave us, we can see further texts. The camel, the way of clothes, the folds of the dresses that they have, the whole costume is nomadic. Hilma Granqvist did not see them that way. She saw them as peasants. They saw themselves as peasants, not as nomadic people, not as Bedouin. And what you have showed us here, what we see in her text is a translation of the way they define themselves. But her books and her photographs belie that text. We see another text now altogether different. I could never, until even now, as I see the pictures, I realized they are very, very Bedouin. They are very Ta'amre Bedouin. Those that are constituted in her text as their enemies, and then they constitute themselves as two different people, suddenly it's the same tribal structure. So basically, whatever we do with Hilma Granqvist, whichever way we look at her, whether it's her photographs, whether it's her writing, with hindsight and further fieldwork experience, we realize she documented very well, archived very well, a particular ecological adaptation to a particular ecological niche of the Ta'amre Bedouins. So when they moved from the desert outside to a place with water, the irrigation system, the fields, it's an adaptation that the nomads made to the new resource system, to a new environment. The same thing with the Bethlehem people. They are Christian, of course, but originally they come from that center, they are Bedouin, nomadic. DNA analysis and all that show this fact of the continuity in that whole region. But the important thing for us is when we look at Hilma Granqvist, she is a pivotal point, first of all. She shows by the fact that she came to the village, was very well received, that St. Louisa was there to receive her and to host her, that St. Louisa was actually a native of Artas. This is something that she was born there. She spent all her life there. Her brother, Louis, wrote the very famous classic, The Immovable East. She came to a village already colonized. What we have seen in Artas over time is the development of Palestinian identity, modern identity, but identity is never fixed. That's another thing that we see from her study. Her study focuses on their manners, customs, in one moment in time. Very, very limited moment of time, a particular adaptation to a particular socio-political, economic conditions that they had to suffer through from the 1820s till the beginning of the 20th century. But that moment, one more time, indicates to us that Palestinian cultural identity is not stable. It is a series of adjustments and adaptations to the environment that has been made by the various tribesmen. And when I mean tribesmen or nomadic, we have to realize that the Jebusites, the Edomites, all these people, the Canaanites, the Nabateans who lived there, they all had moved in. They all had made their different adjustments, and we cannot deny that Artas does not exist in itself. It exists within the concept of the leftover of the Edomites, for whom, Herod the Great built Herodian right next to them. And it was the big storage place of the Bedouin tribes was next to Herodian until 180 years ago. There's a richness in the area that she touches on but she touches on in a very particular paradigm of the period, which is called the functionalist period in anthropology. And she took these elements, documented them, and she gave us a wonderful rendition of a way of life, of particular adaptation, of particular interaction, that at one of the same point shows that Artas, the small village out in the mountains, was part of the whole political movement from Napoleon to Ibrahim Pasha in Egypt, which was one country, to Istanbul, to England. These were all playing role in producing the lifestyle, affecting the lifestyle of Artas. It was not an isolated piece, a relic from antiquity. Rather, from her books, from the context that she provides for us, we come to see we cannot study a single village simply by itself. It has a background, it has a context, it has it is related to the pattern of settlement of Palestine over the past 5,000 years, of which what we see in her books is what one moment in time. There are many things one can talk about it. We can talk just about the history of the city in the 1830s, 40s, the life that they had led in the castle before they were returned to their village. We can talk about the early period when they worked as workers for the Brandenburgers and the Muslims and the millennials who paid them wage labor to work in their own field. We can talk about the period of the 20s in the British when they fought for their rights for water, when the Jerusalem municipality wanted to take them. There are so many aspects, but the most important part, she portrayed women, men of the village in the most beautiful way. And if one were to read the books, which we did for us, it was like reading a big romantic novel about our romantic countryside, and she beautified it. It is beautiful. And she showed all the elements of human delicacy, of frailty, of the compassion that she had with them, brought out that beautiful dimension that in the end, I became an anthropologist because of her work. A different anthropology, but she led the foundation for the Palestinian anthropology. So the Palestinians will always be indebted for Hilma Granqvist. Without her contributions, we would not, first of all, have the data altogether. And second of all, we would not have the poetry that goes with describing a way of life. So as a Palestinian, I'm just humbled by her great work, but also I'm very thankful she is the starting point for us with how anthropology should proceed in Palestine. Problem remains, looking at the Palestinians at any moment, though there is all the archaeological background, each moment is meaningful by itself in itself. The present moment people in Artas have nothing to do what you see in her books. They don't have that function, they don't have the ceremonies, they don't have the rituals. All the life that she described, the Feast of the Eggs, the weddings, the marriage at the pit when a person dies, a husband dies, and that she asks for, they marry her to someone. When a child is born and they marry her. These things don't happen. You look at them in the book and you just read her books about the marriage, the funerals, the childbirth. Wonderful. It's a document of a special era, and it goes to show that, first and foremost, Palestinian cultural identity is many chapters, it's many moments. Hilma Granqvist gave us a very, very important moment. It's not the original, it's not the authentic, it's a moment in time, a particular adjustment to a very hard situation that they made, and they are far beyond it. And basically, it is just to think of Louisa, which we don't talk much about her. Tourists used to come to Artas and they used to buy little gifts. She taught the peasants, and I saw the products in the Boston Museum. They would take the lemon, the lemon, after they squeeze it, and they would make plaster with the form of it, and they would make dolls that they would sell to the tourists. She would be selling the little flowers that grow, a kind of anemones that grow up in the coquelicot in the mountains. She used to be able to show them how to dry them, how to put them in cars and sell them to tourists. She told them how to, she created new resources, but at the same time, very artistic. And you see what a delicate person Louisa was, and how lucky Hilma was to have met with a woman who is so well connected to the people, with such a good eye for the nature there. And of course, Louisa was very artistic. We only know about her honey, but also she did great artwork among the village, of which nothing remains in Palestine. You have to go to Boston and some private collections, and then you see, these were done by the Artas villages. None of that exists now. It's a different world, it's a different life, but what we have is a wonderful dream, a wonderful nostalgic work into the past of the Palestinians, and the only Palestinian village that's really very well documented. So we thank you. We thank what's a wonderful work you do, and we hope your work is translated to Arabic, because as you see, even today, very few people will follow us because it's in English. It should be in Arabic, and it should be made accessible to the Arabs, and such conferences should be made in Arabic language or with instant translation to promote the great work that you had done. Again, thank you for inviting me, and good luck.
Thank you very much, Dr. Qleibo, for this, may I say, beautiful presentation of a beautiful work. After these perspectives, we will move on to see something of the village as it is today. Just a moment, I will share my screen this time. We will see a short slideshow of 15 photographs, which will lead us to modern Artas, to see the landscape, few landmarks and people, and eventually to the house of Hilma and Louisa, where Hilma spent her years in Artas. Some of the pictures are mine and some of taken by the volunteers who work in order to keep the memory of Hilma alive. Artas of today, a village of 6,000 inhabitants approximately, mostly on the northern slope of the valley, here seen from the west. Village from another angle. The valley of Artas is green. No wonder that it was already in ancient times associated with the biblical gardens of Solomon. There is an abundance of water. Part of it is here. One of the best known landmarks, also mentioned by Dr. Qleibo, are the pools of Solomon. From the 2nd century BCE until the British Mandate era, they were an important water supply for Jerusalem. And more water. The spring of Artas in the middle of the village was the center of Artas in Hilma's days. It was the news office. It was the meeting place, and it became the setting of many of her photographs. Still today, the water is flowing. Here, the school children of the village are cleaning it from weed. A third landmark of the valley is the convent of Our Lady of the Garden from the beginning of the 20th century. Standing almost alone on the opposite slope of the valley, it is visible almost from everywhere in the village. And here we are in the courtyard of the convent with two of those volunteers, Ramzi to the left and Samir to the right. This was the spot where Hilma arrived for the first time. On the opposite side of the valley, slightly to the right, hidden behind a big tree, is the house which became her home for the years to come. But before we proceed there, let's see some people. the children of Artas Elementary School sent their greetings to us. So do the children of the secondary school or young ladies. And this picture is very special. Habsa Sanad is the only surviving inhabitant of Artas who remembers Hilma from her childhood. She is 105 years old. And now to the house. In the middle, you will see the mosque, and the spring is deep down on the left side. Hilma's house is behind the big tree on the left. The path to the house leads from above. This is the sign by the doorpost. The volunteers wanted to call the house a friendship house, and it's a good name because guests are welcomed to the house. Here, a group of Finnish university students from my university 4 months before the pandemic, together with Mahmoud and Ramzi. By the way, the picture on the sign is a painting by Ramzi based on one of these old photographs. And finally, we are in the house. Here, a little museum is step by step getting its form. Here we see our first speaker, Sofia Häggman, surrounded by the volunteers, the most of whom are also present today here in our webinar. From the left, Fadi Sanad, a relative of that old lady, by the way, Mahmoud Jabr, then Ramzi Abu Sway and Samir Shaheen. One of the friends, Omar Shaheen, the chairman of the association Artas Folklore Center, is outside of the picture, perhaps behind the camera. Behind the group, you can see books by Hilma. After this little introduction, we will open a live link to the village of Artas, and I hope we can hear short greetings from those volunteers of the House of Hilma. Perhaps it's Mahmoud who will speak, at least in the beginning.
Good evening, everyone. Excellency, ladies and gentlemen, my dear friends. Hello to everyone. Well, my dear Pekka, you exactly know where we are now. I think we are in the Hilma house with my friend Samir and Fadi and Ramzi, and I will show a little bit the house. Okay. لا رجعت sorry. Okay. So first of all, we are 4-person volunteers called the Sons of Hilma in Artas. Trying to do something for this amazing woman, which we know her about the story that our grandmother and grandfather tell us about. So as you see, we try to discover this magical character, Hilma Granqvist. And trying to do something for her memorial. Because of that, we talked with the owners of this house, and thanks for God, we succeed to rent this house and try to transform it to become a little museum that we can show a little bit where is and how Hilma Granqvist live and write a little of her books, and of course, her beautiful and wonderful pictures. I want to show you something special for us. It's the Hilma camera, the original one. I hope that everyone can see it. So we aiming from this house to build a bridge between us and our friends in Finland, and of course, everywhere in this world, and to receive more and more visitors and researchers who really do want to know more and more about this wonderful lady. But because of the little source that we have, we cannot doing what we are dreaming of till now. So I would like to thank Sofia and of course Dr. Pekka for their help and to put the light on this village and the place that where Hilma was living and studying. And thank you for getting or giving us the opportunity to access for her archive digitally. It's a huge step for us. It's gonna let us to know more and more about our history and our tradition and local culture. And we are welcoming everybody to come and visit the village and the museum after, inshallah, this pandemic end. And I want you to see the house from outside. This is the house from the out. And this is the big tree that Dr. Pekka talked about before. So I hope so that you are enjoying what we showing you and telling you. And thank you again. Thank you.
Thank you to all of you, and thank you, Mahmoud, for this presentation. Now we have also seen the camera. We know where it is, after having seen all these pictures. So thank you, friends in Artas, and please remember, everyone participating this webinar, what Mahmoud said, you are welcome to the village and to the house of Hilma. And these guys need our support. It's very simple. Thank you. We have now reached the last point of the webinar. As you might have noticed in the invitation, one of the organizers of this webinar is the representative office of Finland in Ramallah. The closing remarks will be given by Päivi Peltokoski, Ambassador of Finland to Palestine. Please, Your Excellency, the screen is yours.
Thank you, Pekka. Can you hear me and can you see me now? Okay, good. Thank you. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's my honor and pleasure to say the closing remarks for this very special event. Thank you all who are working and to save the heritage of Hilma. I think I feel very humble after these all wonderful presentations and the messages from the Artas village. I'm very impressed actually by the professionalism and enthusiasm that you feel in your work. And I think that Hilma's heritage and your dedication to save it for the future generations is something unique and it can serve as a source of inspiration to all of us. And I also feel that Hilma herself is a source of inspiration. This brave and internationally oriented woman in the 20s built one of the first bridges between Finland and Palestine. And people to contacts are something that we can never have too much, I think. I would also like to take this opportunity to tell you briefly about our work, of the work of Finland's representative office in Ramallah. We are altogether 10 people there, 3 Finns and 7 Palestinians, and our office has been there since 1999. Our aim is to support Palestine in its peace building process, institution building, and to promote relations between Finland and Palestine. And culture and history, of course, are very important elements in our work. And a large part of our work is related to development cooperation. And there we have 3 main sectors. The first one is education. The second one is support to vulnerable areas or people living in vulnerable areas. This means Area C, Gaza, and East Jerusalem. And the third component is civil society support. And in all our activities in our office, we want to promote and stress the role of women and young people in the Palestinian society. And we feel that their role is topical, especially now when the Palestinian elections are approaching after 15 years of break. But I see that the work with Hilma's heritage in Palestine, especially in Artas, but also in Finland, Sweden, London, elsewhere, is very closely linked with our aims in Palestine. And also our office has been able to support some translations and publications related to Hilma's heritage, and we wish to be with you also in the future. Unfortunately, personally, I didn't have the opportunity to visit the village yet due to the very difficult COVID situation in Palestine. But I heard that visitors are welcome, and I hope to visit the village and the museum and the wonderful volunteers in the Hilma's house already this spring with my colleagues. With these words, I wish you all the best in your important work in preserving Hilma's heritage. I'm looking forward to meeting you all in person, and you are always welcome to visit our office in Ramallah in Albi. And Wa'ad Mabruk. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. It's time for the final words of thanks. But first, I will hand over the microphone to His Excellency, Mr. Taysir Al-Ajouri, the Ambassador of Palestine to Finland and Baltic countries.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we hear.
Okay, thank you. On my turn, I would like to thank all the organizers of this day, and thank the government of Finland and the people of Finland. Our work also here, as Her Excellency mentioned, to increase and to develop our relation between the Palestinian people and the Finnish people. We are not too much in the mission here. We are 2 diplomats and 3 local staff here, and we are doing our best. I would like to thank you all for all what help our people and enlightening the history of our people. And as you see and mentioned, we are organized society, we are developed society. We try to be harmful and peaceful in building stability in the whole region. Thank you again. Thank you for all the organizers. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. And now it's time on behalf of the organizers, to express the warmest thanks to all of you who participated this webinar. Thanks should, of course, go also to the excellent speakers for all the information you shared and your experiences you shared with us, despite the limited time. We hope that all this was informative and gave inspiration. Remember to visit the digital archive at granqvist.sls.fi, and keep in mind that you will be warmly welcomed also to the village of Artas to follow in the footsteps of Hilma Granqvist. And finally, if you missed anything, this webinar will be within few days or a week or so published in the YouTube channel of the Society of the Swedish Literature in Finland. Thank you, everyone, and by these words, the webinar will be closed.